Welcome back to the second part of my discussion about research problems, questions, and the hypotheses. In the last section, I talked about research problems. From a research problem, you generally form a question and then you turn it into a statement that sums up your study. Then, once you have the statement and the question, you form a hypothesis. Let's look first at research statements. Here are there are different kinds of research questions. First of all, a research question could be descriptive, where basically you're asking what is or what are. Some examples of this would be, what are the test scores for math for third graders in Nevada? Or what are parents' opinions about how their school communicates with them? Or what do teachers want for professional development during the year? So those are all descriptive kinds of questions. Now, if you're going to get into non-experimental relationship questions, you're asking if there's a connection, or does one thing vary with another, or can we predict? Some examples would be, is there a relationship between zip code and reading proficiency? Or as teacher experience increases, do student achievement indicators increase also? How about, can we predict graduation rate from the third grade reading proficiency scores? Or even something as the relationship between, like, is there a difference between girls and boys proficiency scores for 8th grade science? So those are non-experimental relationships that we're working with there. And finally, there can be experimental types of questions. And those are when you're asking if there's a statistically significant difference or an effect of something. So some examples. If we use a conflict resolution intervention, will there be a statistically significant difference in the number of violent incidents compared to a control group? Or what is the effect of homework on math achievement? Those would require experimental types of studies. Research statements should have 4 pieces to them. They're going to give you the purpose of the study, the variables that are involved, it's going to set up the logic, and it's going to show you the context. So look at this research statement. The purpose of this study was to determine which type of after-school tutoring best helps growth in reading fluency with low SES 4th graders. So you've got the purpose, you've got the variables involved, and more on that in a minute. You've got the logic. You can see that there's going to be different types of tutoring programs compared. And you've got the context. This is with low SES 4th graders. In a good research statement, you're going to see the variables spelled out. These are the pieces of the study that change or vary. So you can see there's 2 variables here. We're looking at the type of after-school tutoring, and then we're looking at the change in growth. First of all, look for the independent variable. This is the one that the researcher changes or varies. Sometimes the independent variable is a natural variable, such as gender or age. In any case, it is the variable that you think influences or affects some kind of outcome. So in this case, the independent variable of this study is the type of tutoring. Next, look for the dependent variable. This is the one that is influenced, affected by, or varies because of the independent variable. So in this study, it's the growth in reading fluency that is the dependent variable. There are other types of variables, but they're not usually addressed in the research statement. Instead, you find them in other sections of the study. Extraneous variables are usually outside influences that simply mess up your study. For example, if I am studying teacher job satisfaction and a new contract is negotiated in the middle of my study, it's really likely that the contract will be an outside influence on teacher job satisfaction, and my results are probably going to be influenced by this factor. It's extraneous, it's outside of my variable, and I didn't make allowances for it. Confounding variables are also usually outside. They're the variables which hide the effects, and they could actually be the variables responsible for whatever change you see. In other words, you could have the wrong variable in your study. If I'm looking at after school tutoring and I'm not controlling for the type of reading program used by the teachers, I've got a confounding variable, and I could actually be studying the wrong variable that's responsible for growth. There's often a construct in the research statement. In this case, our dependent variable, the growth, is really a construct. It's a measure of achievement that we have invented. It's a concept or a pattern that we use. So reading fluency is a construct. Finally, there will be a research hypothesis. The logic of this is if, insert the independent variable, then dependent variable. So if something changes or I do something or I compare something, then I'm going to have this outcome. That's the logic, even if it's not always stated that way. Ideally, the hypothesis is directional. In other words, it sets up for how much difference there's going to be and which way it's going to go. Is the dependent variable then going to be higher, smaller, greater, less? Hypothesis must be testable. Otherwise, it's just a conjecture or a prediction. There has to be a rationale for the hypothesis. We don't just go around making up predictions about the world. They're based on research, previous studies, the literature in the field, and they should be stated very clearly in a good research article.